Hello, welcome to Birdwatching, where hopefully this guy talking about this game can maybe get you to watch this movie. Find out more at the end of the video. You, the player, are Sekiro, bodyguard to a young heir of the esteemed Hirata family with divine blood capable of passing on immortality to others. Along the way, a coup results in Sekiro losing an arm and having to traverse many lands to save the divine heir. Out of these lands, the relationship between the following three are especially interesting: the scenic Senpo Temple, the macabre Mibu Village, and the sacred Fountainhead Palace. First, the Senpo Temple. It is largely occupied by groups of travelling warrior monks, fiercely motivated to attain spiritual enlightenment by any means necessary, one of which being their spearheading multiple experiments on children to try to replicate the immortality and passing properties of the divine Fountainhead waters. This was shortly after a war with the Fountainhead broke out. Their belief was that replicating immortality more amongst their numbers would let them achieve true enlightenment, though this would go on to be disproven when we come to Mibu Village. A small, isolated fishing town of people who have near direct access to the Fountainhead waters via waterfall, but it is heavily diluted, leaving most of the residents as nearly mindless, undying husks of their former selves. At the heart of the village is a stone table and palanquin, wherein one can give sacrificial bribes to the Fountainhead Palace. The Mibu perform these sacrifices because they seek to become citizens of the palace, so their immortality will be purer still while they live there in immortal joyous harmony, supposedly. This brings us to the Fountainhead Palace itself, where warriors trained with legends, where people were offered in exchange for glimpses into their vast knowledge of combat arts and immortality imparting waters. But not all is as it seems. While many of the Fountainhead warriors are youthful, strong, and dance in joy at times, the Fountainhead nobles are a much different story. They've been alive so long that they feed on the youth of those that enter the Fountainhead Palace, mostly feeding on those from the Mibu, who continually provide for the Fountainhead in futile attempts to gain respect and citizenship from the palace nobles. It is here we meet an old nameless woman. She's actually quite young, but her father was lured to the Fountainhead out of his religious devotion to the divine citizens there. Naturally, she followed her father, who would eventually be transformed into a citizen of the palace. The palace nobles then feasted on the daughter's youth until she had none left, though her new age has given her a peculiar advantage. She's nearly invisible to the nobles now, as they have no appetite for consuming the elderly. We travel further up the palace and eventually come across the attendant of the Great Carp, the father of the woman we passed. After a brief exchange, we continue our journey, opening the gates that lead us to the Sakura Dragon, the tears of which can reverse the immortality of the divine heir's blood, whom we are acting on behalf of. Battle ensues, and things seem to be progressing well, until we come back to the room behind the gates, where the Fountainhead elites kept their sacrificial palanquins. Corpses of palace nobles are strewn about the floor. The sound of repeated stabbings fills the air. It is the old daughter of the great carp attendant, furious yet tragic in her words, sobbing in her final moments before dying of exhaustion.
You tricked him all this time! Nobility this, and eternity that. Pretty lies to fool him! Give him back! Father! My father! him back!
This scene really hit me hard on my first playthrough, remembering that for all the passion and sadness that motivated the daughter to try her best to bring her father back, he'd almost likely never have even recognized her. Or maybe he would have turned her away even if she did find him. Frustration and video games go together like bread and butter, but in a moment like this, I was angry at the father's blindness, that in his pursuit of joining this seemingly divine utopic society, he's oblivious to the pain and torment caused by its inhabitants, as well as the vitality and youth of most of the Fountainhead being the product of sacrificing others. So, at that point, I walked up to the great carp attendant and... in the end, he was just a sad, deranged husk of his former self. Even his last words, begging forgiveness for failing to keep his duties as attendant. But he was a man once. So were the Senpo monks trying to replicate immortality through unethical means. So were the Mibu villagers sacrificing others to the Fountainhead. The Senpo and Mibu held the abilities and resources of the Fountainhead in such high regard as an idealized land of perfection that not only did they cannibalize themselves in pursuit of it, but that very sacred land they were inspired by relied on cannibalizing others too. So, while no purely utopian society is really represented in-game, it can be said that the attempts made from different in-game factions to achieve an idealized perfect way of living resulted in cycles of suffering and injustice perpetrated in service of those lofty goals. I'm not claiming the game says don't try to make the world better or a lot of people will die, but it is very necessary to be cautious of and attentive to who and what you'd be willing to sacrifice in service of making a better world, as sometimes simply giving up something or someone to die won't always get you what you think you want. Welcome to the first episode of Birdwatching, a video essay series where I'll analyse, review, critique or discuss various films, television shows, pieces of theatre and video games. More specifically, I will be looking at pieces of media that I feel have some interesting thematic parallel or similarity to the upcoming indie film Birdcage. So, with that in mind, what is Birdcage about? It follows the story of Oscar, a young man living with his parents who eventually travels away from his family when he happens upon a secret society in the woods that promises acceptance, peace, and love to all involved as long as they follow only one single specific rule. I decided to talk about the in-game story of Sekiro in this episode because, in a way, both it and Birdcage have sometimes different and sometimes similar ways of exploring the concept of utopian societies, how they can come about, and what their creation can entail for those living within them. Thanks for watching, everyone. Admittedly, this video was less a specific review and more a lore analysis, so expect future videos in this series to be a bit more varied, but depending on reactions, may make another lore analysis video in the future. So, please follow the social media handles showing up on screen for Birdcage, where you can see trailers, teasers, and other interesting content. I especially like the character profile slides and storyboard images over on Instagram. I've also linked the socials of the Collective, a podcast series run by a couple of friends of mine.
You can find them over on Anchor and Spotify. Their YouTube, it also has a couple interesting interviews with authors like Rin Chupeko and Natanya Barron. I'm looking forward to your thoughts, so don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to stay notified. Peace.